Yeah, yeah. Okay, hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Yu Liu will defend her academic thesis, change is the only constant, the dynamic nature of attentional bias for food. Dear Yu, we are very happy to see you live from China, and may I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis?
Yes, thank you, Prorector. Now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, before I start, I would like to ask all of you, could you see my screen? Yes, perfect.
Yes, we do, Liu.
Dear Prorector, dear members of the Corona, dear family, friends, and audience, in the coming 15 minutes, I will shortly present a brief summary of my thesis. The topic of my thesis is the dynamic nature of attentional bias for food. I will start with the background and research questions. Worldwide, the prevalence of overweight and obesity is rapidly rising. We live in a food-rich environment in which we are exposed to aggressively marketed and advertised high-processed foods and food-related cues, which may increase our attention to those foods and subsequent food intake. However, the food-rich environment doesn't influence everyone equally. Some people struggle with weight problem, whereas others do not. A popular view is that increased attention to those delicious foods is related to increased food intake and higher BMI or dietary restraint. However, there are several problems with this view from both empirical findings and from theoretical perspective. Firstly, the previous studies do not support this view as compared to normal weight people or unrestricted eaters. People with overweight or restricted eaters not only shows increased attentional bias for food, but also decreased attentional bias for food or no difference in attentional bias for food. Indeed, we can gain lots of pleasure from those delicious foods and pay attention to those foods. But we also worry about putting on weight and try to avoid those delicious foods. That is to say, we have a love and hate relationship with those delicious foods. So theoretically, our food-related motivation should fluctuate between eat enjoyment and weight concern over time, which is especially true for people with a higher BMI or dietary restraint, because they are more likely to face with a dilemma between eat enjoyment and weight concern. Attention to food as a reflection of food-related motivation should also fluctuate between approach and avoidance over time. For example, in one study, participants may think about how delicious the cake is and look towards to this delicious food. But in another study, they think about their health a lot and look away from this great temptation. It is also possible that in one trial of a study, they focus on the hedonic side of food and look towards to them. But in another trial of the same study, they just switch their minds and focus on the health side of food and look away from food. So such fluctuations in attentional bias for food could happen both across studies and within one study within one participant. Of course, if people have really strong executive control ability, they may successfully control their attention to look away from food in most of the cases, and which may decrease the fluctuations in attentional bells for food. So we propose that people's attentional bells for food is not a stable process. Instead, it's a dynamic process which is influenced by many factors such as food-related motivations and executive control. The aim of the current dissertation is to investigate the fluctuations in attentional bells for food within one participant within one study. We firstly investigate the relations between BMI, dietary restraint, and the attentional bells for food. And then we studied whether food-related motivations and executive control could significantly affect such fluctuations in attentional bells for food within one study, within one participant. Finally, we also studied whether food is salient in a sense that whether food distractor as compared to no food distractor can still grab more attention even when the current task require lots of perceptual results. Because of the time limitation, today I will only present studies to investigate the relations between BMI, dietary restraint, and attentional bells for food, and the influence of food-related motivations on such relations. Next, I would like to give a brief introduction of those studies. All the conducted studies adopted widely used food output task to capture participants' attentional bells for food. So in a food output task, firstly, a pair of target food picture and no food picture will appear on the screen at the same time. After they disappear, a probe will appear either in the same size or different size of the target food picture. Participant is required to respond to the location of the probe as soon as possible. If participants pay attention to the food picture, they will respond faster when the probe appears in the same size of the food picture. Otherwise, if participants look away from the food picture, they will respond slower if the probe appears in the same size of the target food picture. Almost all of the previous study, they aggregated all the data of all the trials in a food output task and merely adopted an average attentional bell score to quantify participants' attentional bells for food, like the dotted lines in the graph. As we discussed before, the stable trait-like view expected that overweight and restricted eaters' average attentional bells for food in a food output task would be significantly larger as compared to the normal weight people or unrestricted eaters, just like the orange versus blue flight lines in the graph. However, we disagree with this view and proposed people's attentional bells for food is a dynamic process, which means in some trials, people look towards to the food pictures, but in other trials, they look away from the food pictures. So instead of using an average score to quantify participants' attentional bells for food, we computed all possible attentional bell scores in a food output task and used the fluctuations in attentional bells for food to express participants' food-related attention, like the broken lines in the graph. We expected that such fluctuations in attentional bells for food would be significantly larger in people with a higher BMI or dietary restraint, like the orange versus blue broken line in a graph. To test our hypothesis, we studied the relations between BMI, dietary restraint, and average attentional bells for food, and fluctuations in attentional bells for food within one study, within one participant. As we expected, all conducted studies consistently revealed that there was no significant correlation between average attentional bells for food and BMI or dietary restraint. Although those relationships were previously suggested, our conducted studies clearly add evidence to oppose this previously theorized suggestion. Oppositely, a significant and positive association between fluctuations in attentional bells for food and BMI was revealed in all lab-based studies with a relatively large sample size. However, we didn't find a significant relation between the fluctuations in attentional bells for food and dietary restraint. Then to study whether food-related conflict motivation could significantly affect such fluctuations in attentional bells for food, we conducted a priming study. For this priming study, we firstly primed participants with a health or a hedonic or a neutral context, and then the food output task were used to capture participants' attentional bells for food. The idea of this task is that as compared to a neutral priming condition, priming participants with a health context, they would pay more attention to the health size of food and look away from food picture in most of the trials, which may decrease the fluctuations in attentional bells for food. Similarly, priming participants with a hedonic context, they would focus on the hedonic side of food and look towards to the food picture in most of the trials in the food output task, which may also decrease such fluctuations in attentional bells for food. However, unfortunately, we didn't find that food-related motivations significantly affect either participants' average or variability of attentional bells for food. To sum up, the results from the current dissertation suggest that people with a high BMI or dietary restraint is not characterized by more attentional bells for food. Instead, people with a high BMI are characterized by increased variability of attentional bells for food. However, how to explain such increased variability of attentional bells for food in people with a high BMI is still unknown. We didn't find that such relation is affected by either food-related motivations or executive control. So future study could further investigate which factors contribute to such increased variability of attentional bells for food in people with a higher BMI. For example, more ecological assessments could be used. Of course, future study could also link the intra-individual fluctuations in attentional bells for food to different stage of electrophysiological brain activities. Finally, our study also suggests that food is not that salient as we thought. which implies other factors should be put into the spotlight to investigate how our food environment attract our attention and influence our subsequent food intake. Thank you for your attention. I give now the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much for this nice and clear presentation of your work. We will have the opposition. As you may have seen, we have one opponent less than we organized because of illness. So we have 5 opponents, but we will use the whole time with the 5 opponents. We can have nice discussions then. The opposition will be opened by Professor Peters. Professor Peters is professor in experimental health psychology at Maastricht University. Professor Peters.
Thank you, Mrs. Prorector. Dear candidate, first of all, of course, I want to congratulate you with this really fine thesis. And it was really a pleasure to read, because it is a very nice collection of studies, and all centering around the very consistent theme. And you also presented that's the variability of attentional biases for food. And I also just looked it up yesterday, and also saw that 4 of the 5 chapters are now already published. So that is a really good accomplishment in the 4 years that you have. And I think the 5th one is coming up. So I really want to congratulate you about that. It's a really good achievement. And also, of course, the congratulations for your team, your supervisory team. But of course, I want to ask you a question. And my question is about the central theme of your dissertation. So that's the variability in attentional bias, and as measured by this TLBS measure. And so it's a trial level bias score. And at the start of your dissertation, so in the introduction, you say that it's a relatively new measure. It might be a promising alternative for mean attentional bias, but it's not yet clear what it exactly measures. And it could, you also explained that in your talk, it could be related to more generally poor executive functioning, but it could also be a measure of this approach avoidance conflict. Okay, so now you've done 5 studies, and I saw that you even have analyzed 8 data sets, so a lot of data. But in the end, it appears that you still is unclear what this TLBS now actually stands for. And you said it in your last slide as well, unclear, or underlying mechanisms unknown. And that's also your proposition 3. And that what literally says we don't know with no evidence that it's either executive functioning or this approach avoidance conflict. So here comes my question, at least the first one. So in your opinion, you don't know, but what would you think that it could mean? Or if it's really unclear to you, do you think that it makes sense to continue? Because there's then no theoretical basis why it would be related. So what is your opinion? Should we continue studying this in eating disorders?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, firstly, thanks for your kind words to my thesis, and also thanks for your good question. Actually, I also think about this question a lot. Yeah, because actually this question is what we aim to solve in my thesis, but so until now, we didn't solve it. And from my experience, I think one possible explanation for the underlying mechanism is the conflicting food-related motivations. Although we didn't find any evidence for that, but I still think it may explain the underlying mechanism behind the variability of attentional bias for food, because theoretically it makes sense. And another reason is because in our conducted studies, actually we fail to manipulate participants to prime participants hedonic mindset. So I think that may be a reason that we didn't find food-related conflicting motivations significantly affect the variability of attentional bias for food.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, you say we should not abandon studying this, but we should go on and studying what the underlying mechanism is. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I would like to give it one more chance and to test this conflicting food-related motivation. But if it doesn't work, maybe yeah, it's better to go to another direction.
Right. If we continue on that, because you do one suggestion what you could do to understand more of the underlying mechanism. And you suggest that you could use ERPs with longer reaction time or longer stimulus times, and that you can then see with the ERPs the early and the late attentional components. And that might also be the conflict between the approach, first looking at paying attention and then withdrawing your attention. So that's more the avoidance component. And you propose that you could use this assessment and correlate it with this TLBS measure. And I was wondering why you would think that these two are correlated. And because indeed this approach avoidance with the ERP is within one trial. And if I understand it correctly, TLBS is variation from trial to trial. So it's one trial you avoid, the other you attend. So that's something different than within one trial with a longer reaction time that you first attend and then avoid. So why would you expect that it would correlate these two?
Because as far as I know, of course, I'm not the expert in the neuroscience, but as far as I know, I think if I use the ERP technique, I can record the different stage of attention. I think maybe it can kind of provide a direction to explain the variability of attentional bias for food. For example, we can know which stage the variability of attentional bias for food to link to the early attention stage or the attention engagement or disengagement, those kind of things. And I think maybe we can also consider to use the EEG technique, because as far as I know the EEG can better record participants' brain activity over time. Maybe there are some connection between the behavior oscillation and the brain oscillations. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in the neuroscience either, and I can see the added value and that you could want to continue in this area. But my question was actually, would it correlate with the TLBS? Because that is the variation from trial to trial, and with this EEG, you look at the variation in attention within one trial. So it's a little bit of a different approach, I would say. But anyway, or do you want to react on this? Otherwise, I have another follow-up question.
Yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah, okay, ask. Then I go on. Yeah, because one other thing I was thinking that what it might mean, or what it might stand for, this variability, is also the variability of people, of the likability of the stimuli. Because you did measure likability or palatability. I don't know what you want, but it's just in the likability of food, you called it, I think, in two of your 5 studies. But you only give a mean score. And what I saw, there was quite a big range. Some people had a mean score of 6.5 on likability, so they didn't like the foods at all. So why pay attention to it if you don't like the food? And you showed in the beginning of your presentation, you showed some slides, and I saw some crisp. Yeah, I would pay attention to that because I like crisp. But on the other slide, I saw a Big Mac and I saw ice cream. I don't like Big Macs and ice cream at all, so I would not pay attention to that. So could that be another explanation, that the variability is more related to the within differences, from trial to trial difference in what people like and don't like? And if so, could it be an idea Yeah, that's very short. Could it be an idea to covariate these two, the likability and the TLBS?
I just want to interrupt. Can you give a very short answer to this, because we are already over time? Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a really good idea, because previously I only link the average score to the average likeness score to the variability of attentional bias for food. But I think you provide me a really good direction. Maybe I can also think about to calculate the variability of the likeness of the food pictures. Maybe I can find something interesting.
Okay, so thank you very much. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you. Then we go on. The opposition will be continued by Professor Franken. Professor Franken is Professor of Clinical Psychology at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. Professor Franken.
Thank you, Rector. Dear candidate, I also want to congratulate you on your really important work, and it was interesting to read with excellent publications and really nice journals. So congratulations with that. And of course, I also agree with you that it is an important subject, and I'm fully you are right when you're saying, well, there are mixed results in this area. And I hoped to read your thesis and you had an explanation for these mixed results. But maybe let's discuss this, what the reason could be. And I want to focus on chapter 6 of this thesis, in which you introduce a high cognitive load, high versus low cognitive load. And also in this chapter, you say, well, the mixed results of the previous studies could be like, okay, that could be high cognitive load, but there could be other factors like hunger conditions, maybe different populations, people with food addiction, obesity, or maybe bulimia nervosa. So there might be several conditions, and you only manipulate the cognitive load. So why didn't you, for example, satiety, which seems also to be like an important, you also explain it in the introduction, like that might be an important variable. So why only focusing on the cognitive load and not like other factors which you think are important? That's my first question.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your compliments, and also thanks for your question. My answer is why I only focus on the perceptual load is because that's our idea. Because I have limited studies, I cannot explore everything. So our focus is the perceptual load. So that's our target variable. As the other variables you said before, like the hunger level or the likeness of the food pictures or other factors like the BMI, actually we kind of controlled for those variables.
Okay, I can see that, and I probably thought you were already going to say that you had to focus, but then again, like you overpowered the study. So why not adding an extra condition, for example, like under satiety, or that people are hungry, or why didn't you do that? Because maybe now you miss, like, okay, maybe cognitive load is important, but only in certain conditions. So can you think of another design to unravel these aspects, or what? Or would you still do the same if you had the choice now?
Yes. I think that's a really interesting topic to do in my future studies. Yeah, because indeed, as you said before, maybe like the perceptual loads could have different effects in the different conditions. For example, for the hunger people or people like they feel satiety, or for example, like for the people like with a higher BMI or lower BMI, I think maybe there would be some difference.
Okay, and the quick intermezzo question, like I couldn't see anything in, at least in chapter 6, about the eating instructions and time of experiment, because like if you see French fries in the morning, like I could imagine that it's not really interesting for subjects. Or did you control for that, or what did you do with eating instructions and the time of experiments?
Unfortunately, we didn't do that. So because that's the online study, so like we didn't control for that.
Okay. Yeah. So, but you agree with me that, like for future studies, that could be important, or is it not important at all?
Yeah, I think it's important. For example, like yeah, as you said before, like in the morning, I definitely don't want to eat fries.
Okay. Okay, so we do that next time. My last question, is there still time, Rector, for last question? After reading your thesis, I was wondering, and you also wondered in the general discussion, like, should we continue with this lab task? Like we do it in the lab, like the dot probe or whatever task. And you conclude, I think correctly, that, you know, attentional bias fluctuates over time. You measure the fluctuation within a task, but shouldn't we go further, like measuring it between tasks, over days or maybe over weeks? And you say a little bit about it in the discussion for future studies. Maybe you would also go outside the lab. So what would be like your next step? What should we do with these fluctuations over time, and shouldn't we measure for longer times?
Yes, for me, I think maybe we can like use the phone. So because right now we can do the dot probe task on our mobile phone. So like we can set different time points in a day or in different days of a week, and like send participants with a reminder and to like ask them to conduct the task. And of course, we can also measure their like whether they're hungry right now, or what they eat before, or do they have any plan to eat after. We can measure the context before or and after the dot probe task. Maybe yeah, we can find something interesting.
Okay, and would you do this with like similar tasks, or should we like abandon all these old school attentional tasks and look for newer tasks which might be more ecological valid? Or would you do this experiment with the same task? What would be your suggestion?
I think right now, if I still would like to adopt this trial level score, I think the full dot probe task is a good choice. But I mean, like if I like select another direction, if I want to, for example, capture the different aspects of attention, maybe other task is a good choice. So it depends on my aim.
Okay, thank you very much. I give the word back to the rector.
Thank you, Professor Franke. Then we go to Professor Mures. Professor Mures is Professor of Developmental Psychopathology at Maastricht University, and he will continue the opposition.
Thank you, Mrs. Prorector. Dear candidates, I've also read your thesis with great joy. I really like your work. I also noted what the other opponents already said, the publications, which is really good work. So I think in the end, everything will be published of this thesis, and you can be proud of this achievement. But I also have to raise a critical question, so that's why I'm here. And my question is about the dot probe test, the dot probe task. I was happy to hear that you answered to Professor Franken that you said you would like to continue that task in such an experiment. Well, I had questions about the method. I see that you use it a couple of times during several experiments. And I was wondering about your presentation time. So in one study, I think you have a presentation time of a shorter presentation time, and in another study it's longer, like 500 to 2000 milliseconds. So can you tell me a little bit about the choices that you've made and why you use a variable presentation time across the studies?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind words to my dissertation, and thanks for your question. So yeah, I indeed adopted different stimuli presentation time in my study. It depends on like whether I use the eye tracking. So like for the study that I use the eye tracking technique, I choose a longer presentation time. That is because we want to track participants' eye movements. So we want to give them a longer time to look between those stimuli. And for the other task that we didn't adopt the eye tracking, we give a shorter presentation time. That is because if we give them a longer presentation time, like the 2000 milliseconds, they may feel like boring and they cannot concentrate on the task. And as far as I know, like for other studies, they also like adopt a different presentation time. For example, some studies they even adopt like shorter time. That is because they want to measure the early stage of attention. But for my study, because we proposed such variability of attention about for foods is because the conflicting food-related motivation. So we think it's better to give participants longer time to activate their food-related conflicting motivation. So we choose 500 milliseconds in a study that we didn't use eye tracking to measure the late stage of attention instead of the early stage of attention. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, I understand this, yeah, because well, I'm not so familiar with the attentional bias task, the food-related task, but I know a lot of the research of anxiety-related attention bias. And I was looking at this paper by Koster. You referred to this group in your thesis. And they say something like, if you have really short presentation times, like about 30 milliseconds, then you get more a touch on attention orienting. So, and if you have longer longer presentation times, you get more engagement. And if you take longer, you get longer than 500 milliseconds, you get disengagement and even avoidance. So maybe it's because you will look at the variability. This might be the reason why you didn't find the solid attention bias effect, because you're really maybe what you described happened in your experiment, that people, if you present long, they get, sometimes they have time to avoid, they have time to do everything. You know what I mean? So maybe that is the reason that you didn't find the attention bias effect that you expected to find. Although I know the literature, it's not so clear in this area, right?
Yes, actually, from the results of our study, actually we also found like what you said before, like most of the significant results are found in the study with a longer presentation time. So I think maybe the longer presentation time can give participants enough time to like maybe to switch their motivations. If you give them a shorter time, maybe it's only a test of really early attention or like the orientation of attention. So yeah, I think maybe that's one of the reasons that we didn't find results in some of the studies.
Okay, so and you answered to Professor Franken that you want to continue the work, but in the discussion I read, maybe it's time you are more pessimistic. You say something on page 147, I read, we suggest it is important to establish consistent, reliable causal factors of obesity first, and to avoid applying research findings in practice too quickly. Is this also about the dot probe task, or were you thinking when you wrote this, were you thinking of other factors?
Sorry, I don't understand your question clear. Could you repeat again?
Yeah, so maybe you have your thesis in front of you.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. But I read here in the discussion, you say something like, okay, this suggests that applying attentional bias training to reduce food intake might be an invalid training method.
Yes.
We suggest it is important to establish consistent, reliable causal factors of obesity first, before and to avoid applying research finding in practice too quickly. So maybe you say, okay, the attentional bias is not there, then it's not wise to do the attentional bias training. What other reliable and stable factors were you thinking about?
I think that the attention modification training is not that trustful. It's because according to the results of our study, we found that people high in BMI is not characterized by increased attentional bias for food. So I mean, like if people, they do not have attentional bias for food, why are we training them to avoid those food-related cues? So that's the reason why I propose this.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Maybe we talk some other time about this. I see that the pro-rector is waiting for me to finish. So thank you very much for your responses and good luck with the rest of the questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Dibbets. Dr. Dibbets is assistant professor at the Department of Clinical Psychological Science at Maastricht University. Dr. Dibbets.
Okay, dear PhD candidate, dear U. First of all, I would like to add to the congratulations and congratulate you, your team, of course, and your family with this milestone. Well, you have reached the day of your defense. That indicates you did an excellent job on your thesis. And I also have read your thesis, and I like the way that each chapter sheds a different light on different aspects of attention bias, on bias fluctuations, and also on novel ways how to analyze these attentional bias data. So a nice set of experiments and well done. My questions regard chapter 3. In this chapter, you check the influence of context on fluctuations and attention bias. And you already told us in your speech that the idea is that high caloric food has two different meanings. It can be seen as something delicious and joyful, but it can also be seen as unhealthy and related to weight gain. In your study, you try to manipulate the context. Your participants were primed for hedonic, nice food-related pictures, or with health-related pictures or neutral pictures. And the idea was, of course, that the hedonic context would result in the approach of the high caloric pictures with faster reaction times and longer dwell times, and that the health context would result in avoidance of the high caloric pictures, resulting in slower reaction times and slower dwell times. You also looked in this chapter on the influence of dietary restraint on attention bias. I will start with the first part of my question, and that's about the effect that you have observed. Attentional bias for food was not related to the priming context. Instead, you find that liking of the presented food was related to longer initial fixation and dwell time on the food stimuli. I wonder if you also checked if this effect was specific for food. In your experiment, the food pictures were paired, presented at the same time with musical instrument pictures. did you also check on how much these instrument pictures were liked? It might be that, for instance, people that rated the instrument as really positive might have shown a bias towards these pictures. In that case, your results demonstrate a general positive attention bias, a bias towards pictures that you like, and not specifically to food-related attention bias. So I wonder what you're thinking. Am I right? Is it a positive attention bias, or is it specific for the food pictures?
Dear esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind word to my thesis, and thanks for your question. But I have to say sorry, we didn't check it. So we didn't measure the participants' likeness to the musical instrument pictures.
Okay, but what do you think? Do you think that it is a positive bias, or do you think that people most specifically attend to food stimuli?
For me, I think, I think it's people. I think it makes sense if people like the pictures more, so they look more. They stop more time on the pictures, so they should encourage the first fixation bias to the food pictures. Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Did you check that in a pilot study, for instance, whether they like the food pictures?
Yes. Yes, so, and and I also think, maybe just as you said before, maybe if we measure the likeness of the musical instrument pictures, maybe we can also find the same results, that people who love the such musical instrument pictures, they also pay more attention on the pictures.
Mm-hmm. And would it be an idea to look at the difference in likability of the food items itself? It has been, this question has been asked before, more or less in the same form. Do you think there is a difference between, as Madelon stated, I don't like a Big Mac, so I don't attend to a Big Mac. Do you think there is a difference? Or is it more like people in general focus more on food pictures than on musical instruments?
Yeah, I think it's like it's valuable to study it. Maybe like we can manipulate the likeness of the food pictures and to have a look at the effect of likeness on people's attention to the food pictures.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps they can select the foods that they like and then you incorporate them in the experiment, something like that.
Yes.
Okay. If there is still time, I would go and continue with still time, and then I continue with the second part of my question. And that is actually about the restraint measure. This restraint measure is a self-report questionnaire. You have 11 items, and it assesses dieting effects. And it's something about how often you have tried to lose weight, or want to, if you have tried a diet or something like that. But these general questions do not reflect the current state of dietary restraint. For example, are you at this moment on a diet? Now, you don't find an effect of restrained eating on the attentional food bias. And there are actually two questions. First of all, I wonder if the variance was large enough to detect an effect of this restraint measure on attentional bias. Further, for instance, enough participants with a really high level or really low level of RS. And also, you're looking at fluctuations in attentional bias. Would a state measure, the fluctuations in time about food restraint, be a better method to link this to attentional bias? Because you assume that the attention bias varies over time. So why not the dietary restraint measure that might vary over time at in the same way? So what do you think about this? So first, I would like an answer to the question if you have looked at the variance, so the range in scores, and then about the state versus trait function of the questionnaire.
I think we have the enough range of dietary restraints because during the participants' recruitment session, actually we controlled for that. We kind of select participants because we would like to have a wide range of dietary restraints.
Okay, so you're sure that there's enough range and scores to detect an effect. Okay,
Yes.
and what about the second part? Because it measures more a stable trait effect, while you're looking at fluctuations, and it might also fluctuate over time, the dietary restraint measure.
Yeah, that may influence, but we have a reason to use this skill because our hypothesis is people have conflicting food-related motivation, so it may influence their variability of attentional bias for food. And for the restraint skill is to restraint skill is to measure it's not to measure people's intention to doubt, is to measure it can measure people feel to lose weight, for example, this inhibition eating. And usually those kinds of people, they have a really strong conflict, food-related motivation between eating enjoyment and weight concern. So that's why we use this skill. But yes, I think that, yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, but it might be that if I'm currently on a diet at this moment, it's really hard to get me into the social approach mode. And it's really easy for me to avoid the good looking cakes on the screen. So, and of course you have this restraint measure, but if I was on a diet last year, it might not have an impact for me for my attentional bias at this moment. So would you for next time include an additional measure? Or do you think that, for instance, you also have some questions about having hunger, that it's enough?
Maybe I interrupt now, and maybe you can continue during the drinks.
Yeah, that's fine.
Discuss this issue. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. Then we go to the next opponent, and that's Dr. Hauben. She's associate professor at the Department of Clinical Psychological Science at this university. Dr. Hauben.
Thank you, Mrs. Prorector. Dear candidate, dear U, I also want to congratulate you on finishing your thesis. I want to give you my compliments for the series of excellent studies that you conducted in your project. And of course, I also want to congratulate the entire team, including your supervisors, on this accomplishment. I read your thesis with much interest, and I was especially intrigued by the research that you describe in chapters 4 and 5, where you investigated the role of executive control in relation to attentional bias for food. In chapter 4, you hypothesized that the relationship between attentional bias and BMI might be moderated by executive control, so that the relationship between attentional bias and BMI would be stronger at lower levels of executive control. And you did not find direct support for this hypothesis in a sample of Dutch children, nor in a sample of Chinese children. However, if I look at your data, there does seem to be indirect evidence for this hypothesis, as you did see a stronger correlation between attentional bias and BMI in the sample of Dutch children who also scored lower on executive control. And that was not there in a sample of Chinese children. As you also know, executive functions are still developing in children. So I was thinking that perhaps the samples that you used in these studies were not ideal to test your hypothesis of moderation. And in chapter 5, you also measured executive control, but now in a sample of adults. So that sample would probably allow for a more stringent test of your moderation hypothesis, but to my surprise, in that chapter, you did not test for moderation, and instead you present a different hypothesis. So I was wondering why you did not test for moderation in chapter 5. And because after all, your results from chapter 4 were clearly inconclusive. And apparently that says to me that your hypotheses and ideas about executive control have changed over the course of your project. So I was wondering why that happened and why that change occurred.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your compliments and thanks for your question. Indeed, as you cite, our idea changed during the process of my project. So in the beginning, we just want to do like kind of like the exploratory study and to check whether executive control could significantly moderate the relations between variability of attentional for food and the BMI. But unfortunately, we didn't find any significant results. And for the next study, so the study we conducted among adults, and we changed our minds because like in that moment, we think maybe the idea is that if people have higher executive control ability, it may decrease their food intake, so they may have a lower BMI. It may also influence their variability of attentional bouts for food, so which may also decrease the variability in attentional bouts for food. And yes, we indeed change our mind.
Okay, clear. That happens, of course, throughout the project. But also for that hypothesis, you failed to find any evidence or support. So in the end, I am left with the question, what is your vision now then on the role of executive control? Is that something that you still think is important in relation to attentional bias for food? Or is it something that we need to abandon as a potential mechanism?
From the results of my study and from my experience, right now I think maybe the executive control is not that important to our attentional bouts for food, because according to the results of the chapter 6, we found actually the executive control is significantly related to participants' BMI instead of the variability of attentional bouts for food. So maybe the executive, because we also conduct our study in adults and children, and for the adult study, we have a relatively large BMI range, but we didn't find any significant results. So I think maybe executive control is not a good explanation to the relations between increased BMI and increased variability of attentional bouts for food.
Okay. Thank you. Do you mean then that executive control is not an important factor when we're considering attentional bias, or not an important factor at all when considering overweight and BMI?
I don't think it's not an important factor when we study BMI or we study food-related research. I only mean maybe it's not a good factor to study the relationship between BMI and variability of attentional bouts for food, because we indeed found there is a significant and negative correlation between executive control and BMI. So I think it's a very important factor to study BMI related studies or food related studies, because executive control ability definitely is really important.
Mrs. Prorector, may I follow up with a last question on that topic?
Yes, go your gang, Moksha.
Thank you. You also previously discussed already a little bit the possibility of retraining with Professor Muris. Considering everything that you know now at the end of your project, do you still think it's important that we, let's say, put our money down on retraining attentional bias? Or would you perhaps then say, in light of what we just discussed, that we should shift towards retraining executive control, or maybe another factor?
I don't think it's a good idea to do the like attention modification training. As I said before, if people do not have attention about food, why we training them to avoid the food related stimuli? So I don't think it's a good idea to put money on this field. So maybe like we can do other training like the executive control training or like the memory training or other like cognitive training.
Okay, thank you. I want to agree with that position, and we will see what the future holds in that respect. Thank you for your answer. I will give the word back to the prorector.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent timing, I think. Dear U, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The decree committee that's here will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. And I request that you await the results of our deliberations and our return. So see you later. Okay, we are here again. Ja, ik zie opeens. Ja. Okay, here we are. Yeah. Dear U, the decree committee here present online has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the decree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Nederkorn is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor now to take the floor.
Dear U, I have to ask you, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
Authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present online, I hereby confer upon you, Liu, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, you will soon receive the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the supervisors, affixed with the official seal of the university, shown by the beadle.
Thank you.
It looks beautiful, right, U?
Yes, it's beautiful. I really like it. Thank you.
Great. And now I can congratulate you for real. Dear Dr. E, congratulations for you and also for your family and friends, who now have an esteemed doctor amongst them. Anna and I are very proud of you, and I'm happy that I can speak to you on this occasion. When I think about you and about your PhD project, I think of several characteristics that are typical of you and which make your PhD a success. First, you will score very high on openness to new experiences. The first new experience in your PhD is, of course, traveling to the Netherlands. When you arrived, you were very surprised about the buildings and the quietness on the streets. And of course, the strange food here in the Netherlands. You quickly found your way, learned where to do your groceries, you got a bike for transport, and in a very short time, you had a lot of friends. But you also kept on looking for more new experiences, and you joined the PhD Academy, went on a skiing trip in the snow. We went to England for a conference, and you expanded the trip to see more of London. You also visited Vienna with your family and joined a folkloristic dance club. Now, you not only know how to dance the Greek sirtaki, but you also learned a lot about the European way of life. This openness that you have certainly helped you adjust to our ways in this far, far away country. You are also very friendly and kind. You always have a smile, you care for the other, and you show that with the sweetest cards and gifts for people. This made you a very beloved colleague by your roommates at the office and by your colleagues from the EAT group and CPS. For us, your supervisors, it was always a pleasure to have our weekly meetings, but also to share a coffee or a tea. Another characteristic of you is that you are very smart and independent. Both Anna and I had no experience with this new TLBS method, but you quickly figured out the pros and cons, how it worked, and how to calculate it. We had nice discussions on the best methods, and you always had good scientific arguments. You are creative, designed your own experiments, and even if results were not always as hoped or predicted, you always came up with solid explanations and new ideas for experiments. You are sometimes a bit shy and modest, but also fierce and willing to take up challenges. For instance, you held a great oral presentation in England back in the days when we still had on-campus conferences. You did not only have nice experience in the Netherlands. When you came back from China after celebrating Chinese New Year in 2020, the year of the rat, you were surprised how laid back we were about this new virus and that we acted as nothing was wrong. And soon you appeared right, and the Netherlands were in a lockdown. This put a hold on your adventures and activities. Even with online meetings and outside walks, I think life was a bit boring and lonely. Nevertheless, you kept on working, quickly transformed your lab research to online experiments, and you wrote your dissertation. You used your time very well, and within 4 years, you finished your dissertation, and at this moment you have 4 published studies and 1 submitted articles. That's an outstanding achievement, Yu. When your thesis was ready, you went back to China, as you arranged some interesting job interviews. The traveling took very long, as you needed to quarantine for a very long time before you could meet your family again. First when you entered the country, next when you entered the province, and again when you were finally at home with your family. It seemed endless. But luckily, now you are in a new city where you have family and friends, and you have a job at the university as an assistant professor. You just need the certificate of today, of now, that you passed your defense and that you are indeed a doctor. Dear Yu, together with Anna, we want to congratulate you again. You did an outstanding job and you deserve a very big and loud applause. To be honest, you are my superhero. We wish you all the best for your new career and your life in China, but know that we will also miss you a lot. I would now like to give the word back to the co-lecturer.
Thank you, Professor Nederkorn. Dear Dr. Liu, also on behalf of the Board of Deans and on behalf of the Faculty of Psychology and Neuroscience, and also on behalf of the Department of Clinical Psychological Science, I congratulate you with the honor you have acquired. I also would like to congratulate the supervisors of you, because it's a really good team that you were with the 3 of you. So great, congratulations. Thank you also for being online so late, because I understood it's late in China now, in your place at least. And I hope you will have an after party tonight or maybe tomorrow. At least I wish you a very bright future in your country. And hereby I declare this ceremony to be ended. Thank you very much and congratulations again.